the simultaneity of conflict, right? This is the idea that a war in Europe could happen at the same time as a war in the Pacific. And we've all heard the year 2027. That's just 2 years away.
By 2027, we must be ready for war in Europe and in Asia. At the same time, this is not a tabloid headline. That's what General Alexus Grynkewich, the top commander of NATO forces in Europe, says. A man who commands hundreds of thousands of soldiers and is responsible for the security of an entire continent. There is not a shred of exaggeration in his words. The West has 18 months to prepare for a global conflict with China and Russia. Why? Because a scenario that seemed unreal for years now looks increasingly plausible. China attacks Taiwan, and at the same moment, Russia strikes a NATO country. Maybe a Baltic state, maybe Poland. The goal is singular: to disperse US forces and force the West to fight on two fronts.
The simultaneity of conflict, right? This is the idea that a war in Europe could happen at the same time as a war in the Pacific. The thing Xi's probably going to do before he decides to go across the Taiwan Strait is give his friend Putin a call and ask him to help. That to me means that both of these things could happen together. But we're going to need every bit of kit and equipment and munitions that we can in order to meet that. And we've all heard the year 2027. That's just 2 years away when we think that Xi could be ready to make his move and that phone call to Putin might come. So time is of the essence, and I intend to keep highlighting that and letting everyone know that we've got to move out and we've got to move quickly.
This is happening before our eyes. Right now, as you're watching this, new bunkers and ammunition depots are going up in Kaliningrad. In Belarus, Russia is expanding military bases capable of receiving thousands of troops. In the Far East, Chinese shipyards are working 3 shifts, building giant amphibious vessels and developing a new class of weapons that further threaten Taiwan's integrity. Why 2027? Military experts say one thing: that's the moment when China may feel it's their last chance. Their economy is slowing and society is aging at a dramatic pace. Over the last decade, 40 million workers have disappeared. Every year works against them, and Beijing knows that if it doesn't issue the challenge now, in 10 years it may be too late.
We need to be clear-eyed about China's ambitions. China is substantially building up its forces, including its nuclear weapons, with no transparency and no limitations. From 200 warheads in 2020, China is expected to have more than 1,000 nuclear weapons by 2030. China's military-industrial base is also growing. According to some sources, China is acquiring high-end weapon systems and equipment 5 to 6 times faster than the US.
Russia is in a similar position, isolated, with an economy dependent on China and on raw materials that are losing value. They know time is working against them. All of this makes 2027 look like a deadline, the last moment to change the global balance of power, even at the cost of a world war. In this episode, we won't spin conspiracy theories. We'll show you the facts. Satellite imagery of new Russian bases near NATO's borders, reports on China's expanding weapons programs, and intelligence assessments that point to one conclusion: something big is brewing. And you will decide whether this is a realistic scenario or a grand intimidation game aimed at the West. Why do experts talk about 2027? It's not a random date. In geopolitics, little happens without cause, and this date has recurred in military analyses, intelligence reports, and generals' warnings for several years. Why? It's about a window of opportunity, the period in which China still has a rising military potential before its economic advantages begin to erode sharply. Beijing knows its society is aging at a dramatic pace. In the last 10 years, 40 million people have left the Chinese labor market, and the decline in births is accelerating. Back in 2015, 16 million children were born annually in China. Today, around 9 million, that's fewer than in the United States, which has a population 4 times smaller. China knows that if it doesn't act this decade, the chance to overtake America disappears. Russia faces a similar problem. With each passing year, it loses people and economic weight. In 2024, Russia's population fell by another 580,000, and the economy, despite Kremlin slogans about strength, relies almost exclusively on exports of raw materials that are slowly losing global value. That means one thing: if Moscow wants to rebuild great power status, it must act now. That's why US General Grynkewich says plainly, Russia and China may decide to go to war at the same time to force us to fight on two fronts.
To nie są słowa, które padają nagle i niespodziewanie, przynajmniej dla ekspertów. Ja z ocenami tego typu spotykałem się już bardzo dawno. Zresztą podzielałem te opinie również w mediach. Gdzieś jakieś 4-5 lat temu, pod względem tempa rozwoju sił zbrojnych Chińskiej Republiki Ludowej, że w roku 2027 Chiny będą gotowe do inwazji na Tajwan, co oczywiście nie oznacza, że do takiej inwazji dojdzie.
For over a year, Russia has been systematically expanding military infrastructure along NATO's borders. In the Kaliningrad exclave, analysts have identified a large storage complex suspected of housing tactical nuclear warheads, Iskander-M and Kaliber-NK. Satellite images show new buildings, triple fencing, and modern security infrastructure. In Belarus, near Osipovichi, by the ammunition base for Iskander-M, imagery shows double and triple fence lines, a railhead loading ramp, and new hangars and barracks capable of supporting a missile brigade with 12 launchers, one of the support nodes for Russian tactical warheads.
A comparison between the satellite photos from April 2021 and May 2025 also shows the construction of a major roadway leading to a large platform. This appears to be built for offloading nuclear warheads from trains, while the roadway is likely meant to connect the train lines to the base.
On the Kola Peninsula, at bases such as Gajiyevo and Okolnaya, Northern Fleet area, satellite imagery indicates at least 6 new storage bunkers for submarine-launched ballistic missile warheads, loading platforms, and associated logistics facilities. All of this sits just a few dozen kilometers from NATO's border with Norway. On the Novaya Zemlya archipelago, historically used as a nuclear test range, new tunnel portals and 4 support buildings have been identified at the Seveny northern base. Construction began in August 2023 and continued through June 2025. This suggests preparations to restore nuclear test functions.
Near the test site is a support base on the large island of Severny, as seen on March the 21st, 2021. By August 2023, it's clear the base has started to see significant additions, including a large new building being constructed at the southern end of the compound. A new photo from Planet Labs appears to show that the large building and other additions to the base have been completed. In the last decade, the US intelligence community has accused Russia of continuing to carry out small-yield nuclear blasts. They wouldn't be conducted on these sites, especially given the lack of significant security perimeters. But new signs of life here indicate that the base is active.
Finally, the Nionoksa test range, about 60 kilometers west of Arkhangelsk, has undergone a thorough modernization. Since 2023, 3 huge halls the size of football fields with compressors have been built, along with a missile launch test stand, special blast ramps, and 11 tall precision location masts. The entire site is ringed by a double barbed wire fence, and satellite photos show blue missile containers stored outdoors, oriented toward the White Sea. What about the Chinese side? The plan, the Chinese Navy, already fields around 370 combat ships, more than the US Navy, and with industrial scale production, it could reach 400 plus units by 2030. The Fujian Type 003 aircraft carrier began trials in 2024 with electromagnetic catapults designed for long-range operations. Then there are preparations for a strike on Taiwan in terms of infrastructure and bases, expansions in Fujian and Guangdong, new dry docks for amphibious ships, loading ramps, ammunition points.
提到我们的强大，让他们知道，不管强敌来犯，有我们站在他们身后。香港有我， 祖国有我。
Production of Shuiqiao amphibious barges tested in 2025. Satellite images show pontoon formations capable of rapidly unloading heavy equipment onto beaches. In Fujian and Guangdong, fortified shelters are being built, runways extended, and hangars prepared for J-35 fighters and H-6K bombers, which can reach Taiwan without refueling. Warehouses and command centers within new logistics facilities in Zhangzhou and Xiamen are gearing fuel and ammunition systems to support large-scale maritime operations. Exercises around Taiwan. Joint Sword is a recurring simulated blockade of the island, missile strikes on ports, and amphibious landings. This shows that China is not only building a fleet, but creating a complete operational backbone for a full-scale operation in the Taiwan Strait, from bases and logistics to landing craft and air control. At the same time, reports indicate the steady expansion of nuclear capabilities, and satellite imagery shows new silos for such missiles. What are Russia's and China's armament ambitions? Russia is raising its defense budget to a level unseen since the USSR, over 6% of GDP, which in practice means hundreds of billions of dollars annually. The Kremlin has announced plans to expand the army to 1.5 million soldiers, with 700,000 at combat readiness, alongside the intensive deployment of new hypersonic weapons, Iskander and Sarmat missile systems, and the mass production of combat drones. China, meanwhile, is pouring enormous sums into modernizing its military, officially allocating the equivalent of $230 billion a year to defense, though real spending is much higher. Beijing is developing a navy that is already the world's largest by hull count and is accelerating the build-out of aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships. How is NATO responding? The alliance has drawn lessons from the war in Ukraine and adopted a strategy of higher defense spending across all member states. The 2% of GDP target is no longer aspirational, it's the floor. In 2025, 23 of 32 NATO countries already meet that threshold.
NATO leaders agreed on the The Hague Defense Investment Plan. And this will fuel a quantum leap in our collective defense. And the key decision in that regard is to adopt the The Hague Defense Investment Plan. With this plan, allies have agreed to invest 5% of GDP in defense. This is a significant commitment in response to significant threats to our security.
The United States is investing an additional $60 billion to pre-position equipment in Europe, expand ammunition depots in Germany and Poland, and bolster nuclear deterrence under so-called nuclear sharing. NATO is also raising rapid reaction readiness to 500,000 troops, 100,000 of whom are to be deployable within 10 days. Will these plans translate into real strength? The next 2 years are a crucial test. Europe is making up lost ground, but it remains dependent on US technology and logistics. Even so, many analysts warn the pace of modernization may not be enough if Russia and China opt for a simultaneous attack in 2027. Hence the mantra repeated in Brussels and Washington: if you want peace, prepare for war. Is this just a scare tactic? Not necessarily. Intelligence warned half a year before the full-scale war in Ukraine that it could happen, so such alerts can't be dismissed. Better to err on the side of caution and show the adversary that the costs of such a move would be too high. Let me know if you think a war in 2027 is possible. That's all from me for today. See you in the next episode. Take care.